Hello everyone, Alan Sens here, and welcome to this video on Arms Control Challenges, North Korea, Part 2. In this video, we're going to look at the current situation surrounding North Korea and some of the concerns and challenges and threats that revolve around it. So let's get started. So the learning objectives for this segment are, by the time you're done, you should be familiar with the international politics surrounding the North Korean nuclear program. So the current situation, when we examine this, we can examine it from any number of levels. But as we saw in the previous video, North Korea possesses the full nuclear fuel cycle capability, and it can produce weapons-grade, highly enriched uranium and plutonium. North Korea also continues to develop and test long-range ballistic missiles, and in fact placed a satellite in orbit in 2012. And North Korea has conducted 5 nuclear tests as of July 2017. There is no evidence that North Korea has tested, as it claims, a thermonuclear or hydrogen bomb. We can represent this schematically, and this chart is a good one. This is from the CSIS Missile Defense Project. It was published in the Washington Post. And it just shows the timeline here, and you can see the frequency of the number of missile launches and the frequency of long-range missile launches, or longer-range missile launches, has accelerated over time. And one of the concerns then is the acceleration represents an increase in the capacity of North Korea, both in terms of its ability to produce missile systems, but also its ability to test them and to achieve longer and longer ranges with their tests. Now, the ranges of those missiles are the subject of a lot of discussion, conjecture, and political rhetoric. This chart shows one set of estimates of the ranges of North Korean systems. We're reasonably confident in estimates of these systems, if only because we have a sense of the performance capabilities of those systems, because they're based on earlier types of known ballistic missile technologies. We're just a little less concerned about these, and sort of there's some debate about the range of the Musudan, but especially the Taepodong 1 and Taepodong 2 missile systems. It's largely conjectural. This set of estimates from the Federation of American Scientists believes that the Taepodong 2 is capable of reaching Alaska, as you can see, and the north part of Australia, and large tracts of Russia, China, and Central Asia and South Asia. Now, the names of these systems sometimes vary, and sometimes North Korea changes the names of the missiles themselves, and we're not quite sure what their nomenclature is. But in general, the point is that North Korea is on the verge of acquiring ballistic missile technologies that will enable it to launch ballistic missiles on intercontinental flight paths. And of course, the special concern is that they may very shortly be able to reach the continental United States and North America. Now, here's another set of data. So this is from the Center for Non-Proliferation Studies, and it makes a different argument. So here's a range of missiles that they've looked at. And their argument is that some of these missiles already, in fact, have the range to strike some parts of the continental United States and large parts of North America. So the reality is that estimates of the ballistic missile ranges of North Korean ballistic missile systems, particularly the longer range systems, is largely unknown. But what we do know is that there are no laws of physics that prevent them from developing long-range ballistic missiles. It's an engineering problem, and to this point they've struggled with the engineering of these systems, but they may very well be capable of achieving intercontinental ballistic missile ranges in a very short period of time. So one of the questions that surrounds North Korea is why? What are its motives for developing nuclear weapons and for developing ballistic missile technologies? On the face of it, it's a poor country, right? And we know that it struggles sometimes to feed its population. Basic essentials of modern life are largely unavailable in North Korea. So why would the regime invest so much in the attempt to develop a nuclear arsenal and the means to deliver it? And we can go back to the earlier motives for why you would want to acquire nuclear weapons, why you want to test, and we find a lot of insights. I mean, clearly there's a deterrence dynamic. You can see the quote from this North Korean spokesman back in 2010. And the possession of nuclear weapons then does act as a deterrent to other countries as they confront North Korea. It also provides leverage. So the possession of nuclear weapons by North Korea allows it to a certain extent, set the agenda of any international negotiations or discussions involving North Korea. It certainly allows them to get diplomatic attention. I mean, nothing gets attention like nuclear tests and ballistic missile tests, right? It also allows them to maximize positive outcomes from negotiations because they have the leverage. They can say, if you want us to give up our nuclear weapons, you want us to stop testing, you want us to stop testing ballistic missiles, what are you going to give us? So that kind of negotiating leverage can be very valuable for the regime. In addition to that, there's no question that the possession of nuclear weapons and the development of its nuclear arsenal is a very important characteristic for regime legitimacy. The rhetoric of the North Korean regime, its propaganda, puts a great stock in its nuclear weapons program, and indeed links the success of that program to the great leadership of its political system and ultimately the leader Kim Jong-un himself. We also have to remember that there's a certain amount of bureaucratic politics that could be going on as well, in that the development of nuclear weapons, the development of ballistic missile systems also encourages certain bureaucracies within the DPRK to acquire more resources. It allows them to win bureaucratic battles, win the bureaucratic game. So we can't discount the fact that internal bureaucratic power struggles within the regime are also part of the incentive, part of the motive to develop nuclear weapons, test them, and to develop ballistic missiles and test them. One of the big questions is about the warheads. Are they weaponized? And what that means is, can North Korea take its nuclear devices and fit them onto a delivery system? In particular, fit them into the nose cone of a ballistic missile. And up until very recently, it was believed that North Korea was completely incapable of doing that. Now there's growing uncertainty. I think most experts believe that they can't do it yet, but pictures like this don't help. This is Kim Jong-un posing with a warhead in 2016, and I put that in quotation marks because this picture was obviously intended to indicate that North Korea had successfully miniaturized its devices to the point that they could fit on the nose cone of a missile. But of course, we can't take that at face value, right? This is a photograph coming from North Korea, and this warhead could just be a dummy, right? It could be fake. So again, there's still this debate of whether or not they can actually fit their nuclear weapons and deploy their nuclear weapons onto a delivery system. Now, the regional instability piece is really quite significant. We look at the neighborhood. It's obviously very volatile. North Korea right here. And of course, great concern in in South Korea about the possible threat from the north. Concern in Japan about the North Korean threat. And of course, that has meant that the relationship between South Korea and North Korea and the United States over here, and supporting these two countries, is a real key feature of security in the Northeast Asian region. Add to that the fact that China has tried to maintain some kind of relationship with North Korea. It's clearly growing in impatience, but it still has some trade with North Korea. It still engages in a diplomatic relationship with North Korea. So one of the things we've seen recently is the United States has tried to exert pressure on China to exert pressure on North Korea to give up its nuclear weapons, or at least to come back to the bargaining table. And the extent to which the Chinese government is capable of doing that, capable of exerting that kind of pressure, is largely unknown. And it's not exactly clear how much will the Chinese leadership has to engage North Korea as well. And part of the reality is that China also has its own interest with respect to North Korea. North Korea is a very important buffer for China between the People's Republic here and South Korea, a United States ally right here. So China does have its own interests in mind when it deals with North Korea. So in the future, what might we expect? I think we can expect more tests, both of nuclear devices and of long-range missiles. And I think we can expect in the future that those nuclear devices will be weaponized and that long-range missiles will be capable of reaching North America. Like I said, there's no laws of physics preventing either of those things. These are engineering problems which can be overcome. There's also the possibility that there will be more negotiations. Some of those negotiations might be crisis management, so sort of short-term things designed to deal with immediate issues or immediate problems. But it's also possible there could be a reactivation of something like the six-party talks process, so a longer-term process trying to address the long-term issue of North Korea's weapons program. It's also possible there might be more sanctions and, of course, the continuation of the ongoing sanctions. Particularly worrying is the possibility that the United States or another actor might take military action against North Korea. We're primarily thinking about the United States here, but it's also possible South Korea might act. And, of course, the risk of that is that there would be an escalation and a possible war on the Korean Peninsula, and that war could escalate to a nuclear confrontation, maybe even to nuclear use. So that's the great concern right now, that there is going to be possibly a crisis that leads to an escalation into war or military strikes, something short of war between North Korea and South Korea, between the United States and North Korea, and so on. And that, of course, would be a great threat to international peace and security, and a very real threat to the people of North Korea, South Korea, and possibly Japan as well. The final possibility is that North Korea implodes. I mean, the regime is notorious as a totalitarian, dictatorial regime, and the question is, could it befall the same fate that befell the countries of Eastern Europe, other countries that have collapsed into disarray. And so it's possible that North Korea simply collapses. And if it does, that could be as much or greater a security threat than the current North Korean regime is. And the reason for that is an implosion could lead to instability, could lead to violence, could lead to a flood of migration, could lead to the proliferation of North Korea's nuclear weapons, North Korea's nuclear infrastructure, fissile material, expertise. I mean, if the regime collapses, all of these people might leak out, right, into the international system, and the actual warheads themselves might leak out into the international system. So this is a very grim possibility as well. And so we forget sometimes that it is possible that this could happen. So by now, you should be familiar with some of the international politics surrounding the North Korean nuclear program. Okay, so I'm back, and I think the big piece here is that there's a lot of things we don't know about the North Korean environment. There's a lot of things we don't know about the internal workings of the North Korean regime, obviously. So a lot of our threat assessment, a lot of our risk assessment is based on conjecture and based on estimates. So, but there's also a lot of things we do know. So we also have to be aware of that. And I think one of the great concerns going forward is the possibility that a crisis could get out of control through miscommunication or through miscalculation, and we can find ourselves in a very serious situation, potentially even an armed conflict situation on the Korean Peninsula. I hope you enjoyed this video. We'll see you again soon.